Welcome to Hard Talk with me, Zainab Badawi. Israel says its current campaign in Gaza is in response to rocket strikes from Hamas militants and is aimed at destroying illicit tunnels Hamas uses to smuggle arms. In more than 2 weeks of conflict, around 600 Palestinians, mostly civilians, have been killed and nearly 4,000 wounded. The UN Human Rights Commissioner says Israel may have committed war crimes. About 30 Israelis have died, nearly all of them soldiers. My guest today is Danon, a member of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. He was dismissed as Deputy Defense Minister earlier this month for accusing the Prime Minister of being too weak in his Gaza campaign. How does he justify the high Palestinian death toll? Danon in Jerusalem, welcome to Hard Talk. Do you believe that an unacceptably high number of Palestinian civilians have died in this current conflict?
Zainab, thank you for having me today in your show. Yes, we see the numbers, we see the pictures, and we regret it. Even the loss of one child or one civilian, it is a pity, and we do regret it. But we have to blame Hamas for that. We have to blame Hamas, who is actually using the Palestinians as human shields. They're using them in order to protect them. And you know, Zainab, the Hamas say they are fighters, they want to fight us. Why they are not fighting? Why they are hiding in schools? Why they are hiding in hospitals? Why they are not coming to fight with us and they are using those civilians? It is a pity.
Do you accept that Israel is attracting a great deal of criticism in the international community for the high number of Palestinian civilian deaths? Israel is attracting criticisms, not just Hamas, but your country too.
We are in the middle of a military operation. We are not in a position now to assess who is supporting us, who is not supporting us. We know it's not easy to fight inside civilian population. It is very hard for us. We do the best to avoid casualties. And unlike Hamas, who is using the civilians to hide and is targeting the civilians here in Israel, we do exactly the opposite. We do our best. We even call the civilians and ask them to deploy, to move out from their neighborhoods and not to allow Hamas. But I know it is very hard for them. You cannot blame the civilians because the Hamas is threatening them, is using them. Yes, we are worried about what our friends and allies think, but in a time of war, in a time of conflict, we have to do everything necessary to protect ourselves.
The United Nations Human Rights Commissioner, Navi Pillay, has said at an emergency session of the UN Human Rights Commission on Wednesday that the killings of the children she's talking about in particular, and let me just remind you, around 147 children under the age of 18 Palestinians have been killed. She says their killings raise concerns about respect for the principles of distinction, proportionality and precautions in attack. Let's just take this first one of these points, proportionality. Do you believe that Israel's response to the campaign by Hamas has been a proportional one, proportionate?
Absolutely. When you look in proportion, you ask yourself, when you have millions of Israelis running into shelters, hundreds of missiles. I look at myself, when my daughters for the last 2 weeks have to wake up in the middle of the night and run to the shelter every night. This is not a way to live. The only thing we ask is to live peacefully in Israel. That's not much. And we're defending ourselves.
I'll just reiterate my question again to you, Danon. Is Israel's response a proportionate one? Around 650 Palestinians have been killed. 74% of them, according to the United Nations, are civilians. 147 children, 2 disabled women. I'm just giving you some examples here. And regrettably, on the Israeli side, around 30, a handful of them civilians. Does that sound to you like a proportionate response?
I regret the loss of anyone. But if you look at numbers, you can go back to World War II, when the UK targeted civilian population in Germany. More than 25 people died in Dresden. When you are in a conflict, you do whatever you need to protect your people. And we're doing it now. The order that we give to our soldiers, to our troops, do not hurt the civilians, even if it means that you cannot catch the terrorists. And we're paying a heavy price.
Okay, so you're
when
saying
you look at the numbers,
just on the proportionate number, you brought up history, but let's just focus on what's going on in the Gaza campaign now. Simple question. I'd appreciate a simple answer, sir. Do you think Israel's response is a proportionate one?
I think it is the appropriate response because we are defending ourselves. I was wondering what would be the reaction of your army, of the UK army, if you had hundreds of tunnels beneath London, if you had Al-Qaeda attacking your home, your house, what would be the response of the US, of the EU? When you are under attack, you protect yourself. This is self-defense. That's what we are doing. We did not choose to fight. We do not want to fight. We have no other choice because the Hamas is the one who is actually hurting the civilians in Israel, and we are protecting them.
Okay, another point that was made was this question, this point of distinction, identifying who is a militant and who is not by the UN Human Rights Commission. Her spokesperson, Rupert Colville, has spoken about one particular incident on July the 16th, when kids playing on the beach were struck not just once but twice, he said. There was an airstrike. When the survivors started running, they were struck again, this time we believe from the water. Israel's argument is that there was a military target nearby, but that is too easy. The numbers speak for themselves. How can you justify that?
I will not go inside a particular incident, but I tell you here and now, we regret it. We are sorry about it. But when the Hamas is killing civilians, they are celebrating. This is a difference. When we hurt civilians, we regret, we apologize. It is not our goal.
Sure, but I was making a different point. I was making a different point, and I appreciate what you're saying, and your distinction is that Hamas deliberately targets civilians. I have not made that point to you.
But
and
the
also
Hamas is also celebrating.
You said Hamas celebrates death.
When Israelis...
Sure, yeah.
Yes, and we do not. We do regret it, and we do take responsibility in it.
I was making a different point, though, which is how does the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, identify civilians from militants? Because I tell you, in this particular case, one journalist, William Booth from the Washington Post, was amongst several foreign journalists at the Al Dirra Hotel nearby. He said these boys were scrawny fishermen's kids whom we saw every day running around on the beach, playing in the waves. They were aged between 7 to 11. You're a Deputy Defence Minister until a few days ago. How can the IDF get it so wrong that kids under the age of 11 could be mistaken for militants?
Zainab, when you are in a war, things like that happens. We do not intend to do it. Look at the numbers of the US. In the last 5 years, the US targeted terrorists in Yemen and Afghanistan. 2,400 people were killed by drones only. You know how many civilians were among them? When you have the terrorists hiding behind kids, behind schools, hospitals, it happens. We should blame the terrorists who are using the kids and civilian population, not the one who are fighting against the terrorists.
Okay, can I say that on this particular issue of Israel saying that Hamas uses civilian structures, hospitals, schools, and also uses humans as civilians as human shields. This is what Hanan Ashrawi has said, and she's a highly respected Palestinian member of the PLO. She said on the 22nd of July on CNN, in response to your claim, this is just cruel and heartless propaganda. It is a spin that adds insult to injury and is intolerable because it is a habitual pattern of Israeli discourse. Blame the victims, blame them for losing their own lives.
You know, Hanan Ashrawi can say whatever she wants, but the fact that she hasn't been to Gaza for the last 9 years, you know why? Because if she will go to Gaza, she will be shot by the Hamas. The last time the Hamas and the Fatah met, the Hamas people threw the Fatah people from the rooftops. So we know with whom we are dealing with the Hamas. Even the people in the PA understand it. They actually know that if Abu Mazen today will come to Gaza, I don't know if he will be able to get out of Gaza. The Hamas is a terrorist organization, and it is very hard to deal with a terrorist organization which doesn't care about what will happen to the civilian population.
Oh, yeah, you've made that point. I appreciate that, Danon. But on this question of Hamas using human shields, you've rebutted what Hanan Ashrawi said by saying she lives on the West Bank and hasn't been to Gaza. Jamila Al-Alewa, who founded the disabled home 24 years ago that was struck, said there was no one from Islamic Jihad or Hamas living there. We are not involved in politics.
I told you before, and I think we can agree about it. When you have terrorists hiding behind civilians, civilians will be hurt. It will be like that also in the future, unfortunately. If we will not be able to uproot Hamas, they will continue to use civilians. They will continue to put kids in the front line. You know what's happening now in the hospital in Gaza? It became the command center of the Hamas. This is a war crime. They're using ambulances to move missiles from a place to another place. They don't care about the law. They don't care about the moral. And we have to fight with those people. It is not easy for us, but we are committed to do it.
I've been quoting Navi Pillay, the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner, to you, and she has said on several occasions and reiterated it again in her latest comments that Hamas firing rockets into Israel, targeting civilians, could constitute a war crime. She has said that. But I'm now asking you to look at what the Israeli Defense Forces, what the Israeli government is sanctioning. I appreciate that what you have said about Hamas you've been repeating, but I just want to continue on this point that you have made, that you don't target civilians, and I'm not saying you are, but you have said that you give civilians a warning that they should flee an area that you are about to hit. But you know, this is what Jens Lurk, spokesman from the United Nations Office for Humanitarian Assistance, OCHA, told a news briefing in Geneva this week. There is literally no safe place for civilians in Gaza.
Zainab, you can bring quotes for an hour. It will not help. I ask you, you know, maybe you will tell me, what should we do in order to fight Hamas that is hiding behind civilians? Do you have any other ideas? The UK, the US, the EU? What can we do when we have our people under attack by Hamas and they are hiding in hospitals? What should we do? Should we sit idly by and say, well, we have nothing to do. Let's wait until they will be able to kill more. Let's allow them to build more tunnels and commit massacres in our communities. We're dealing with a terrorist organization who is hiding behind civilians. Yes, and I agree with you, it is very hard, and sometimes civilians will be hurt in the future. That's why we are fighting Hamas, because of their behavior, because of their values, which is not the same values that you and me have.
But the fact is, I was putting to you the fact that you are failing to protect civilians in Gaza. I made this point that the UN says, and I'm not just giving you quotes, I'm just saying to you that the UN say, where do people flee to? There have been cases, the UN say, where people have heeded warnings from the Israelis and gone to different areas which they believe are safe, and then they've been shelled there. That's the point. They have nowhere to run to, is the point being made.
I know in some neighborhoods that we gave warnings, we text messages, we called them. We initiated contact with them, and they did not leave their homes because they couldn't leave. They wanted to go, but the Hamas terrorists threatened them and told them, you cannot leave your homes. It is not easy. We are not dealing with an environment which is a Western society. And unfortunately, those people are hostages in the hands of the Hamas. They are being used by them. And I tell you something. When I see the pictures coming from Gaza, I am very sorry. I see the pictures, and it makes me sad. But the Hamas people are not sorry. They are happy about those pictures. They're using those pictures in order to continue with their propaganda. And this is a pity, but we have to realize that.
Your Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in fact, said on CNN a couple of days ago that the Hamas are using telegenic dead Palestinians for their own cause, were his exact words. But on this question of where the Palestinians can flee to. Obviously, the borders of Gaza are closed, so they can't leave Gaza. Nearly 2 million people in an area which is 25 miles long and 7 miles at its widest. Just another example, BBC World Affairs editor John Simpson said on a report on BBC TV that one resident in Zaytun with an extended family of 45 told him, "We received the Israeli warnings to leave, but where do we go? The whole Gaza Strip is just a small box." So my point to you is this. When you say, yes, we give warnings to civilians to go, they can't heed those warnings necessarily, even if they can.
First of all, I do agree with you that to be today a resident in Gaza, it's not pleasant. It's hard. I do understand it. But yes, they can move. Before we operate in a certain neighborhood, they can move to another part of Gaza. Is not a small town. They can move to another place. And we saw it in the past. Unfortunately, in this operation, we haven't seen many people running away before we moved in. And the reason they didn't do it, because they were threatened. In the past, you saw them going by trucks, by feet, by moving to another part in southern Gaza. We haven't seen it this time because the Hamas understood that if they will leave, it will be very hard for them to hide. And that's why we do see so many casualties.
All right, see so many casualties. I put it to you that you are getting a lot of criticisms internationally. I'll just give you one example. Laurent Fabius, the French foreign minister, said on July the 22nd, Israel's response has to be proportionate. 600 dead is obviously something we cannot accept. Nothing justifies continued attacks and massacres, which we do nothing but only claim more victims and stoke tensions and hatred. He's using strong language there, massacres, saying your response is not proportionate. And he's making a third point, which is actually it doesn't achieve your objectives, it merely stokes the hatred.
We hear those voices. We hear also other voices. We have Secretary Kerry coming to the region. UN Secretary General was here also in the region. We hear other voices as well. We do want to end the conflict, but we want to do it afterwards that we know that the Hamas will not be able to continue to send missiles to our towns, that he will not be able to dig tunnels beneath the border. And I want to remind you, 9 years ago, we evacuated Gaza completely. We have no Jewish communities, no settlements, no businesses, nothing there. We went out of Gaza. And instead of using the greenhouses that we left for them, they took it and they made it as terrorist base. Instead of making Gaza the Singapore of the Middle East, they made Gaza the Afghanistan of the Middle East. And we regret that.
Well, the blockade, I just have to come in here, that the economic blockade, of course, around Gaza, now Egypt obviously as well is also part of that, but Israel's blockade of Gaza has impoverished the Palestinians. So it's no surprise then that even though Israel did withdraw its settlements, that the people of Gaza have not been flourishing. But
let's speak about the blockade. Let's speak about it.
Well, just a minute. I'd like to speak about the blockade, but in the context of the ceasefire, which the Palestinians are saying, including President Mahmoud Abbas, not just Hamas, that they'll agree to the ceasefire if the blockade is lifted. What's the likelihood of that happening?
Well, I think in the long run, we do want to see more connection between Gaza and Egypt. We want to see them getting electricity, gasoline, food, everything they did from Gaza. But what happened now? We allowed cement to come from our part, from the ports of Israel. They took that cement and they built tunnels to dig under the border. So yes, we want to see prosperity in Gaza. But as long as the Hamas is in charge, they will use everything we will allow them in order to build more tunnels, to build more missiles, and this is unfortunate. Instead of using the cement for hospitals and kindergarten, they use it for tunnels. That will be the problem if we will not uproot Hamas today.
But just on those tunnels, one commentator, David Gardner, writing in the Financial Times, says, it would be so much easier to monitor traffic into Gaza if the borders were reopened on top. You could even, as one Palestinian member of the Palestinian parliament has said, have international monitors to see what's going in and out of Gaza to ensure that the wrong stuff isn't going in.
But let's make a distinction. The tunnel that I'm talking about is offensive tunnels for Hamas commandos to go inside Israel, to kidnap children and to commit massacres inside Israel. We are not talking about the tunnels that they used to have between the border of Egypt and Gaza. The tunnels inside Israel, they have dozens of them that we know by now, maybe more. Those tunnels are being used to kidnap children, to kill Jewish people inside Israel. And you see the amount of cement, technology, electricity
So
that they put into that
so
tunnel,
what do you do?
And it's scary.
So you believe, and you fell out with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu because you were saying that his response has been a bit too feeble. What is your recipe for success then? Just carry on intensifying the Israeli action on Gaza to completely obliterate these tunnels, regardless of what the human cost is?
I think what we are doing now is the right thing. And I had a disagreement with the Prime Minister because he accepted the premature ceasefire last Tuesday. That was a mistake. You cannot accept a ceasefire when you have hundreds of missiles in your hometowns, when you have dozens of tunnels that's risking your children. And I think now what the Prime Minister and the government is doing is the right thing. We are discovering the tunnels, we are fighting against the Hamas, and we will not allow them to go back to square one. We are willing to talk about the future with the Egyptian, with the Palestinian, but to allow Hamas to become stronger again, that's something we should not allow.
But, you know, can you just tell us then, have you revised your opinion of the Prime Minister? Do you now back him 100%? Have you told him that? Has he said anything back to you on this?
Absolutely, absolutely. The minute he went into the operation, I told it publicly that I support the Prime Minister and the government. My criticism was when he accepted the ceasefire. I cannot understand how can we accept a ceasefire when we have so many tunnels, so many missiles in our direction. That's something I couldn't accept, and I said it publicly. But now the Prime Minister has my full support on this ground operation.
So now, what do you think the Israeli response will be to this united demand by the Palestinians, including President Abbas? It's not just a Hamas request, that the ceasefire will be accepted if the blockade on Gaza is lifted, if its borders are opened.
Our biggest problem that we are not dealing with a rational player. So Abu Mazen can speak.
That's
President
Mahmoud Abbas.
Sisi
You're calling him Abu Mazen.
Correct. But the Hamas
is he
not
rational?
responding.
Are you saying President Abbas is not rational?
No, I'm saying that the Hamas is not rational. And with all due respect to all the rational players in the region and to all the mediators who are coming to Israel, and we are happy that they are coming and trying to help us. But the Hamas is not a rational player.
But
that's why it is so difficult to speak about the future.
It's not just Hamas who is saying this now. As I said, it's the new technocratic government. The Prime Minister of that has said, we want this blockade lifted. It has impoverished the people of Gaza to an extent which even the UN accepts that before that blockade there was a vibrant economy. Now 80% of the people in Gaza rely on handouts. They have no future. They're living in these crowded, unsanitary conditions. So it's not just Hamas who are making this request. What is the likelihood of Israel responding to this?
Zainab, we want to see prosperity in Gaza. We want to see the people in Gaza having better education system, having better economy. But when we look at the Hamas and what they are doing with the funds that you are giving them, the EU, the US, we see what they used the cement for, what they use the technology for, we understand it will not work. The more we will give them, they will use it against us. So yes, we want to see better life for the people in Gaza, but we understand that with Hamas, it will not happen.
Just in 30 seconds, July the 15th, President Shimon Peres of Israel said, ultimately, the solution must be political, not military. Briefly, is the president right or wrong?
He is right regarding the vision. He is wrong about the partner. The Hamas is not a partner for peace. We know it when we have to realize it. The Hamas is a problem, and when you have a problem, you have to deal with it and not to ignore with that.
Danon in Jerusalem, thank you very much indeed for coming on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.